In part 2, we discuss the intellectual and argumentative fallacies around the Joe Kent discussion. In this video, part 3, we're going to do something different. We're going to walk through and analyze Joe Kent's appearance on the Shawn Ryan Show and break it down, where I agree, where I disagree, and where I think critical analysis and nuance is being missed. Because one of the biggest issues right now is people are reacting emotionally instead of actually listening to what's really being said. So let's drown out all the rumors, the propaganda, and the political posturing, and let's go through this step by step. I'm a 20-year veteran of the military and spent majority of that time in special operations, and was also from the same Tier 1 Special Missions unit as Joe Kent and his wife. We actually worked a lot of the same target sets, especially involving Iran, and I spent majority of my career focused in Iran, Islamic Republic, the IRGC, and the Quds Force and its proxies. So now I'm going to start breaking down a number of clips from Joe Kent's recent appearance on the Shawn Ryan episode. The first clip I'm going to talk about is when Shawn Ryan asks Joe about Trump's recent statements about his negotiations with Iran and Iran's denial of these said negotiations.
I would love to believe our president and our administration, but just like we talked about at the very beginning, everything that has come out has been a bait and switch, complete 180 fucking lie. This is what Iran says. The Iranian Foreign Ministry and state broadcaster IRIB stated, in quotes, "No conversation has taken place between Iran and the U.S."
So you can already tell that Shawn is already leaning towards believing in Iran. And I think that comes with a bunch of the frustrations that he's had with the Trump administration. But automatically believing one nation that's well known for its deception is a bit of flawed logic. And look, I understand that our administrations have also been known for their own levels of deception, and to immediately believe Iran without really having any evidence to support either way isn't a good logical conclusion that I can agree with. Because it's very possible that these talks are actually happening, but this is definitely one of the situations that we need to wait for evidence to support one way or the other. So the next clip that we're going to cover is when Joe Kent talks about restraining Israel.
I think if President Trump focuses on it, I think he has the power to restrain the Israelis, but that's the key first step in any formula towards peace. He's got to restrain the Israelis before he can even get the Iranians to the negotiating table.
So Joe says that we need to restrain the Israelis if we ever want to get them to the negotiating table. And I actually agree with this because Israel definitely has their own objectives and they don't necessarily align with ours, and they could disrupt ours. And us being the larger player here, and we control essentially the outcomes, and we have the power to restrain Israel. I think that we should, especially when their objectives no longer coincide with ours. The next clip I want to cover is actually a clarification of Joe Kent's stance on his support for Trump.
I was and remain a big supporter of President Trump's overall thesis of foreign policy, of peace through strength, of stopping us from getting involved in costly wars. In particular with Iran, I think President Trump was uniquely postured to cut a great deal with Iran. He had, in the first Trump administration, he had killed Qasem Soleimani, the terror mastermind. Once he left office, the Iranians went right back up to their old tricks. They funded their proxies. They were attacking our troops in the region. October 7th happened. America generally was not respected by the Iranians. When Trump came back into office, the Iranians automatically said, okay, wait a sec, this is a whole different administration. We might be able to cut a deal with this guy, but also if we don't, he will use force like he did against Qasem Soleimani. So they stopped their proxies from attacking us. The last time I was on your show, we were talking about how there had been over, I think, 150, 200 attacks against our forces in Iraq and Syria. That stopped when Trump came into office because the Iranians knew who was back.
So Joe very specifically says that he was a supporter and still is of Donald Trump's overall foreign policy thesis. He has talks about how effective he was, especially when it came to Iran, and how he uses peace through strength and how it's been so effective, and how the Iranians have responded to it, especially after he killed Qasem Soleimani. And during his administration, the proxies had pretty much stopped their attacks, unlike that they did when they were actually pretty aggressive during the Biden administration. So you can tell that he definitely is a fan of what Trump is capable of, what he has done. And obviously there's some disagreements now with what he's currently doing, but this actually goes back to the support later on we'll talk about, is why he still believes that Trump can still turn this around. But we'll get to that later. The next clip that we're going to discuss is Joe Kent talking about the Fatwa when it came to building nuclear weapons.
Now, President Trump's stated policy had been, and he says this all the time, that Iran can't have a nuclear bomb. Now, the Iranians actually agreed with President Trump, and they had a prohibition, a fatwa, a religious decree, on actually producing a nuclear weapon that had held since 2004.
So Joe discusses about how Iran has put a fatwa on nuclear weapons weapons, and that he kind of discusses in a way that means that they're not going to do it. I personally am kind of disagree with this, and I'm really kind of skeptical when anytime the Islamic Republic uses sort of a religious sort of decree or a religious aspect to sort of convince us that they're not going to do something. Well, Iran has been well known for their deception, and I believe that this is just one of many things that they're just trying to distract us while either they wait till Trump is out of office and then possibly somebody comes in who's not quite as bold and can then essentially get back up to the old trick. So I'm very skeptical when they start talking about their fatwa on nuclear weapons. The next clip we're going to discuss is when Joe talks about Trump's leadership circle.
However, he had all pro-Israel hawks like really in his ear. Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, and then on the outside, again, the media echo chamber, knowing that President Trump was watching Fox News, knowing what media he was consuming, and they're all saying the same thing: Iran can't have any enrichment, which basically put us on this collision course towards a conflict.
So I think it's very important to listen to what Joe is talking about here, about he believes that Trump is surrounding himself by war hawks and he existing in a bit of a media echo chamber. And all of us can sort of relate to this because when we listen to social media and we have our own algorithms that sort of support us, like the social media knows which political side that we like to listen to, and it constantly feeds us that. And that's us living in an echo chamber. And it's very possible for anybody to do that because it's confirmation bias. Like when we hear the things that we want to hear, it sounds great. So it's much harder for us to break out of that. And so I think it's very important, and we're going to talk about this more later, about trying to penetrate that echo chamber. So I actually agree with Joe that this is actually a worry that we should have. We should have this worry when it comes to any one of our leaders, is that they might be falling into a possible echo chamber. And this is definitely something that we should look out for. So the next clip that we're actually going to discuss is actually Joe covering the retaliation risk of us actually not going in with Iran on these attacks.
I think you saw Marco Rubio and others come out immediately and say, well, yeah, there was an imminent attack, and the imminent attack was the Israelis attacking the Iranians. And then we knew that they would retaliate back against us.
If they know that the Israelis are the ones that hit them, why would they retaliate against us?
Because they know that basically we fund the Israelis, that Israel would not have the offensive capability without us.
So Joe confirms here that there actually was a threat, that if we did not actually go in on the attacks with Israel, that we were going to get retaliated against. And in Marco Rubio's statement that if we did not go in, that there was a possibility that we might take more American lives, and thus by going in with Israel, we can do as much possible damage and limit the actual retaliation against us. So the next clip we're going to get into is where Shawn Ryan specifically asks Joe about the clip that everybody asks about from his previous episode 2 years ago, and where Joe can't discuss the threat that Iran posed and about 150 people that were killed by the Iranians. And he specifically asks him about people think that he flip-flopped. So let's watch it.
They look at the totality of everything I've ever said. I am neither an isolationist nor am I a hawk. On Iran, if their proxies attack us, we should hammer them. I will debate anybody on the utility of killing Qasem Soleimani. President Trump was justified, and he was correct, and he was bold for killing Qasem Soleimani and his deputy Abu Mani Mohandas.
So Joe clarifies about his stance in Iran has not really changed. He's neither an isolationist, he's not a war hawk or an interventionist, and that he believes that Trump was completely in his right and supported him killing Qasem Soleimani, and anytime that we're attacked by Iran, that we should definitely hit them back. Where I think that Joe's stance has sort of changed or is different, and why people think that he's flip-flopped, is that he just doesn't think that Iran is currently as big of a threat because of the proxies have sort of stopped attacking targets because they're sort of afraid of Trump and how bold he is and his ability to retaliate, unlike how they conducted operations during Biden's administration. And I think that's where people start to get confused. You're like, oh, he's flip-flopped. No, he hasn't flip-flopped. He still believes that Iran is still a threat. He just doesn't actually believe that they're as big of a threat currently because they're not doing anything to really attack us, that we shouldn't aggravate that any further. And we'll get into that, and he kind of talks more about this a little bit later on. Strength isn't built in comfort. It's built through repetition, through discipline, through showing up when it would be easier not to. For me, training has always been about pushing limits, becoming stronger, faster, and more capable every single day. But the gear you wear matters.
Barbell apparel was built for athletes who move, who train, who refuse to compromise between performance and style. Clothes that move with you, built for strength, built for durability, and built for the grind. Whether it's the gym, the track, or the everyday mission, train hard, move freely, live disciplined. Barbell apparel. Use code StoicViking25 and step into gear that's built for you, how you actually train.
So the next clip we're going to cover is when Joe discusses regime change in Iran and his personal views on it.
For the record, I'm not a fan of the Iranians. I'm not a fan of the Quds Force. Like, I fought them, you fought them, they've killed friends of ours. But at some point, we do have to find a way that we can de-escalate these situations and move on. The default answer can't always be, well, we're going to do another regime change war and get sucked into this place for 20 plus.
So Joe further clarifies that he's not a fan of the Iranians, he's not a fan of the RGC, he's not a fan of the Quds Force, but what he's afraid of is regime change. And he believes that the only way to get regime change is by having American boots on the ground and getting involved in another sort of Iraq situation, which I completely agree with. One, we should never have boots on the ground, and we definitely shouldn't get involved in another Iraq. You know, one, we've lost that political capital in the Iraq war, and then also we would take away legitimacy from any sort of new regime if we're the ones who installed it. But where I obviously disagree is I do think there is a possibility for regime change with the Iranian people. I just honestly, as we can get into this later, I don't think it's going to happen this time, but it is a possibility it could happen eventually. But I agree that we should never have any boots on the ground. We should be restricted to limited strikes, but we'll get into that more later. So the next clip we're going to talk about is when Joe discusses the role and effectiveness of limited strikes.
Back to the policy of the first Trump administration, President Trump would use force where required, but then, like no other president I've seen, he would apply other leverage that only America has in terms of economic power and in terms of diplomacy. So after he kills Soleimani and Mohandas, he goes and he slaps maximum pressure sanctions on Iran that makes the economic life in Iran very, very challenging. That results in waves and waves of protests that we were seeing. Back in January, just not that long ago, we saw Iranians out on the streets protesting against the current regime because of the cost of living.
So I wanted to discuss this clip for two reasons, because Joe reiterates the effectiveness of both the limited strikes in combination of the flexing sort of American diplomatic muscle by slapping down sanctions, and then which sort of then will spawn economic pressure, creating issues within that country, then creates organic protests, which also then leads to further weakening of that country, which it kind of supports our overall end goal one day is the fall of the Islamic Republic by the people of Iran. But also you can see that throughout this interview that Joe supports not only what Trump has done, but he also still believes that Trump is still possible of doing great things and is still a bit of a supporter of him and in hopes that things turn around. But we'll get into more of that later on in this video. Now, the next clip that we're going to discuss is where Joe Kent discusses about the Iranians rallying around their flag.
Now, if you want to ruin all that, you go as an outsider with the Israelis and you strike them, because then everyone is going to rally around the flag. That's why we're not seeing any protests. That's why even the Kurds have said, hey, we don't want to be part of any kind of regime change right now.
So Joe is making the case that any foreign power that starts attacking Iran, whatever level of dissent the country maybe have with its population, would actually go away, and the people of Iran would rally along around the flag and basically prepare to fight this foreign power that's attacking them. And he gives sort of further justification that because we haven't seen any protests. So I disagree with this for two reasons. Because one, I actually don't think that the Iranian people, because the majority of the people don't really support the Islamic Republic, just a few attacks going in would suddenly turn the people's view. I've heard from a couple different sources of Iranians when they've been able to get out information that the people of Iran, even inside the country, are actually celebrating on the U.S. strikes. Understand that there's some hardships that go along with that. Going back to the other point where Joe says that about not hearing anything about protests coming out. Well, one of the reasons we don't really hear that much either way is because the government of Iran has shut off the internet. I think that, one, I sort of disagree with this assessment it is, but we really don't have that much evidence to prove either way. So the next clip that we're going to cover is where Joe discusses the differences between the Israeli and the United States strategical goals.
Well, the problem is we have a drastically different strategic goal than the Israelis do. So we will say that Israel is our ally in this. They're basically our co-equal in this. People like me will say, actually, we're not really even co-equals. They're leading because we're having to react to them. But either way, we're basically joined at the hip with the Israelis. Now, the problem is they have a much different strategic goal and a much, I'd say, higher threshold and tolerance for chaos and bloodshed.
So Joe is talking about the strategic differences between the United States and Israel. And a lot of that comes down to the difference in how we fight wars. And that comes down to the situation situation that Israel finds itself in, which it feels like it's in an existential crisis of a fight for survival. And that's sort of the limitations that we as a country put on ourselves in warfare, where we try to limit civilian casualties. They don't have those same limitations. And you're going to see this as a bit of a reoccurring theme, not only in this video, but in later clips that I'm going to cover. The problem is we run into differences in objectives when we're in a conflict together, because they're willing to do more than we would like to do for various different reasons. And when you have two countries that have difference in objectives, and one may want to ceasefire and like, hey, we're good with these objectives, the other one may become a problem. And because we are the stronger country and we have the power, we need to have the ability to rein in Israel when we believe that we have met our objectives. So I definitely think this is something that we should try to truly understand and also keep in mind while moving further in this entire situation. The next clip that we're going to cover is about Kharg Island.
Reporting that the president is considering seizing Kharg Island, Iran's main hub for oil exports. This is you quoted. I just think that would be a disaster, Kent said of deploying U.S. troops there. It would essentially be giving Iran a bunch of hostages on an island that they could barrage with drones and missiles.
So what Joe is talking about is Kharg Island, which is an island about 15 miles off the mainland of Iran. This is where about 90% of the country's crude oil is processed. So this is a huge part of Iran's economy. And about 2 weeks ago, we did military strikes on Kharg Island where we didn't touch any of the oil infrastructure, but we did destroy majority, if not all, of the military infrastructure on that island. And then we deployed 2,500 Marines to that area. And the worry is that we're going to use these Marines to take over Kharg Island. And Joe talks about how they would be sitting ducks and then they would be like the worst possible situation. And I actually completely agree with this. And I actually already had discussed this on the Into the Breach podcast with Ethan. And for them to go on there, because one, it's not the very big island. And obviously oil, it's kind of flammable, but you're so close to the island and they have nothing really to do that they would be just shooting ducks and they would just fire everything at us. And if I was the Iranians and we put 2,500 Marines on that island, like I said, it's not very big. It would be one of the sort of a target-rich environment. But what would be the strategic goal, right? What's the point of taking that island if we don't plan on actually putting boots on the ground on Iran? If there was some sort of strategic combination with some other strategic push or goal, that might be possibly something. But just to take the island, just to take it, our Marines would be just sitting ducks. And I actually think this is a bad move, and we should actually not put troops on Kharg Island, and we should leave it alone. The next clip that we're going to discuss is where Joe discusses the different advisors that Trump probably should listen.
Who are some people that would give him better advice?
Vice President D&I Gabbard and their teams, I think, are absolutely key. And there's good people at the Pentagon that can give you options.
So he's not taking advice from his own vice president?
I don't know. I wasn't at the vice president's level. I think they have a good relationship. Based on what I've seen and based on what we've seen in the public sphere, he has been taking more advice, obviously, from Lindsey Graham, from Ted Cruz, from Mark Levin on TV.
So Shawn asked Joe about who are some people that would give him some better advice. And he says D&I Gabbard and J.D. Vance. And I think this is really important because I think all of us can get in situations where we only want to hear what we want to hear, and we surround ourselves by that. But I think it's very important for all of us, but especially our leaders of our governments, to surround ourselves with people who are not just going to tell us what we want to hear. They're going to be the dissenting voices. But we should just, in general, we should always surround ourselves with opposing views, because we never want to be caught in our own echo chambers. Because when that happens, then that's when we really stop doing the type of level of critical thinking that we need to in order to make the best decisions, not just for our lives, our own lives, but our country. So the next clip that we're going to watch is where Shawn Ryan brings up the No New War slogan, which was one of the talking points that the Trump administration ran on their campaign in 2024.
No new wars. It just echoes in my head.
Completely avoidable. And I pray, again, he listens to some of the voices that can get him out of this. I think there's still time, but this is very bad, and this could get worse. And I think platforms like yours are important because people like you, big podcasts, I think you guys brought a lot of people out to vote for President Trump. And I think it's really important that all the people that are watching this show and all the other podcasts call their senators, call their representatives, make their voice heard, because there is, again, that media ecosystem that kind of exists oddly in the White House. We've got to penetrate through that. They were listening during the campaign, and I think they'll listen again if people take this as a call to action.
So I think the takeaways from this clip is that, one, you can see that Shawn Ryan, his frustration with the administration is once again sort of coming out. But it's interesting because Joe kind of like calms him down and is like, hey, there's obviously an issue and this could get worse, but there's still a chance to correct this. And one of the things that we need to do is sort of penetrate this echo chamber that's kind of going in the White House, because there's this level of confirmation bias that's going on right now. And it's a bit of a concern. And I agree. I think that there's definitely a possibility that is actually going on. And if it is, we as our kind of collective voices do need to help let them know that, hey, we don't want boots on the ground. Like, we don't want it to go much farther than this. And I think that's a kind of a really good telling sign that this is what Joe wants, and not just to abandon Trump. It goes back to, he still believes in him. He still believes that he can pull himself out of it, that it is our job as people to sort of like let our voices heard, but we have to let them be heard in sort of a calm, cool, collected way with logic and everything like that. But if we're constantly just badgering at each other the entire time, nobody's going to listen to us, and we're never going to get our message across, and we're not going to make anything better. So the next thing we're going to watch is where Joe discusses the targeting of civilian infrastructure.
Stuff floating around about strategy, attacking their infrastructure, taking away the fertilizer for their food, creating famines, hitting their water supply, starving them of water. Hitting their energy grid. Is there any validity to that?
I'm sure it was looked at because we look at everything, but that I don't know. The only strategy I've seen is the punch list of military targets. I still believe the U.S. military would not deliberately target civilian infrastructure in that way.
You don't think we would do that?
I don't think we would. I just, based on my experience in the military, I don't think that we would.
So Joe addresses the claim and the worry that the U.S. might target civilian infrastructure. And obviously he quickly acknowledges this is probably something we looked at, but it's not something that we would do. In his experience in the United States military, it's not something that we do is we deliberate a strike civilian infrastructure. Obviously, sometimes that happens by accident. And I would completely agree with this. In my experience of 20 years in the military, the United States, we don't target civilian infrastructure on purpose. It occasionally happens by accident, but we never do it on purpose. And it's never been a part of our strategic goals. If anything, we actually go out of our way to try to prevent it, probably to our own detriment. Now we're going to watch a clip right after this where Joe starts talking about around the same subject of what would the Israelis do this?
Will the Israelis? This is the problem. This is the problem that we have being partnered with someone who has different values than we do. Look, the Israelis believe this is existential. The Israelis, we've seen what the Israelis, what they did in Gaza. They have a whole different way of fighting wars than we do. They fight total war. They fight very, very biblical wars. We do not.
In all honesty, they fight a war how you should fight a fucking war.
Precisely.
So Joe then raises the same sort of question about attacking civilian infrastructure toward Israel. And that brings up the issue, which is that we have a different value system than Israel does, which because of that, they fight kind of like this total war concept, which happens because they're in a bit of an existential crisis because they are fighting essentially for their survival. And because we have different values and, they're more acceptable for civilian casualties and we are not, this can cause certain issues when we're both in the same conflict together. We're allies. When you have different values, we're going to have different objectives. So this is sort of also a reoccurring theme that's going on, which comes back to if we want to accomplish our objectives and not take it too far, we need to be able to essentially reel in Israel. So this next video is going to cover one of the larger issues that came out of Joe's resignation, which was the sort of claim that Israel was responsible for what was going on in Syria. And Joe talks about it in this clip.
The war in Syria wouldn't have happened if the Iraq war wouldn't have happened. So the Iraq war was driven obviously by the neoconservative movement here in America, military-industrial complex, but a big part of that was also the Israeli lobby. Benjamin Netanyahu at the time, who had just gotten done being the Israeli prime minister, I think he was still in government, he was like the finance minister, he came and he aggressively lobbied and testified in the House and in the Senate that Saddam was developing weapons of mass destruction. So he helped launder that narrative that Saddam was developing weapons of mass destruction in conjunction with the military-industrial complex and neoconservatives to say that we had to go in and we had to take away the nuclear weapons.
So Joe kind of like further explains that he was not saying that Israel is directly for the deaths that is going on in Syria, but where he's saying that they're responsible is because Syria happened because of Iraq. And as we all know that we were sort of lied into that conflict. And apparently Israel had a bit of a pretty decent sized hand hand in helping convince the United States that there were weapons of mass destruction. And that is where his frustration and that sort of comment of where that was coming from. It wasn't that they were directly responsible for what was going on in Syria, but they were responsible for what led us and the situation into Israel or into Syria, which I've seen the reporting on this, and I actually agree with this actual statement that Israel definitely had a hand of what happened in Iraq, and Iraq definitely led to what ended up happening in Syria. And Joe goes further into sort of the ISIS consequences that happened based off of these sort of domino effect from Iraq all the way down to Syria.
Once we got into Iraq and got into that quagmire, the U.S. government, screwed things up so badly that we basically handed over Iraq, as you know, to Iranian-backed Shias that were there. So by the time we were done in Iraq, Iran pretty much controlled Iraq through their proxies, helped them circumvent sanctions, made Iran even stronger. So then you had the Shia crescent. You basically had a unification of Tehran, Baghdad, and Damascus, forming that crescent, that land bridge of Iranian supplies going right into Israel's backyard. So the Israelis at the end of the Iraq war were like, no, this is not going to work at all.
So Joe goes further into sort of the consequences and the fallout from the invasion of Iraq, which eventually led to the creation of ISIS, and then ISIS then invaded Iraq. Well, already Iran was sort of having a pretty big influence on Iraq, but because ISIS invaded, the only thing that could stop them was the Shia militias, and this was Qasem Soleimani came in and came up with this great idea that he was going to use the fact that he was going to rescue Iraq with the Shia militias, that he was going to essentially solidify the taking over of the Iraqi government by Iran, and they would essentially become a puppet government. And then they created this uninhibited weapons pipeline all the way to Hezbollah, because it would go from Iran to Iraq to Syria and all the way to Hezbollah. And this peaked from probably 2014 all the way to 2018 is probably their peak power, where they were almost had sort of an unripped power, and they were this Pax Iranica, where they very large power in that area. Luckily, it's been starting to decline a bit. So over the next two clips, Joe sort of discusses how the border ties in with both the external and the internal threat, and how sort of open borders have caused more risk in these particular situations.
I testified publicly in December that we at NCTC had identified 18,000 known suspected terrorists who had access to America. The more we dug into the data of the last 4 years, the more I realized we have no idea who's in our country.
So Joe, obviously acknowledges that he publicly testified that there was 18,000 people, and he even further clarifies that they don't even know. It's probably even more than that. And one of the biggest issues because of that is because we've had this open border for the last 4 years during Biden's administration. So listen a little bit more.
And it goes back to the border was open for 4 years. So it's kind of like if you and I wanted to attack our adversaries and they left their border open for 4 years, how creative could we get? And that's the opportunity that we gave all of our enemies. So when people would say, well, how many bad guys do you think are in the country? They're like, seriously, what's the number? I'm like, I don't know. I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you the truth is that the more we dig through the data, the more we realize we really, truly don't know. And then people would say, well, do you think it's sleeper cells? Do you think it's this, that, or the other thing? It's like, well, the only thing we created for the last 4 years under the previous administration was a massive opportunity for terrorists to exploit our country and to kill people here.
So it obviously goes further into why we have so many issues currently and why we don't quite understand how many people is because of the fact that our border was open. And we will always know this to be a fact because one, it's one of the biggest platforms that Trump ran on. It was one of the biggest deciding factors of his victory. And majority of the people in the country believe that, one of the biggest issues was the border, both obviously predominantly on the right and then also a pretty decent majority even on the left. And those issues continue to cause not just, threats internally, but also the threats externally keep coming in and it keeps causing more and more issues. So I definitely think one of the issues that we can do, especially for the future and for many different reasons, is to obviously to close our borders. And I completely agree that if we were wanting to run amok in another country and we knew that they had open borders, that would definitely make our lives that much easier. So the next two clips that we're going to cover is where Joe discusses the leak allegations around his final months and in the resigning of his position.
You're being accused of leaking classified information.
Yeah.
What classified information did you leak?
It's a good question. I didn't leak any classified information. I had my full security clearance until last week when I walked out the door. I had full access to everything. So my security clearance was never suspended, never pulled. I think most of these leak allegations are just a media narrative to take away from the conversation that you and I are having. The first leak accusation surfaced right as I was going live with Tucker.
So the fact that he had his security clearance all the way up to the very end, and this narrative that he was under investigation from somebody who's been under the investigation for a very similar allegation. The fact that even suspend or temporarily suspend during the allegation or this supposed investigation sort of makes me believe that what he's actually telling is the truth, because one, he's innocent until proven guilty, but also the fact that if there was an allegation, and usually what they do in this situation is they will actually temporarily suspend his security clearance while they finish the investigation. Not every single situation goes like this, but definitely in most times that I've seen this sort of situation happen, they will temporarily suspend it during the investigation if the allegations or suspicions are strong enough. Let's continue listening.
I mean, I take it seriously. The FBI has ruined innocent people's lives, like General Flynn, with an accusation before. So I take it seriously. I'm confident I didn't leak any classified information, but at the same time, like, we kind of know what the game is here. And if they really were going to investigate me, they would come to me and say, hey, you're being investigated, or we're going to ask you some questions, etc. If they really were going to investigate me too, I don't think they would tip their hand ahead of time by leaking it. That doesn't work out in their advantage at all.
So I think it's really big here is the fact that he states that they never actually approached him. They never informed him directly. And when I was essentially accused in my particular investigation, where I was accused of disclosure of classified information, which is similar to what people are claiming that he's accused of, the first thing they did was they approached me about it. And they gave me the fact that I was under investigation. So apparently, if he was under investigation months prior, but he was never notified, that definitely stinks. That doesn't make any sort of sense, and actually leads me to, because one, I already was like under the impression like, hey, you're innocent until proven guilty. But now that he's stated that nobody approached him during the investigation, that doesn't make any sense, because when you're involved in an investigation, one of the first things they do is they actually come to you first and inform you that you are currently under investigation. So I'm going to go ahead and believe that this is actually false. And I'm going to say it right now, I don't think these allegations are going to come of anything.
Most people that serve in the government, I've found, they want to make their boss happy. They don't want any friction at work, and they want to salute and they want to move out.
You know, I think that's where everybody's lost it.
100%. I agree.
Fucking job is to protect and serve the people of the United States.
So I actually could not agree with this more. I actually think that one of the biggest issues within the military, especially with how the military rank structure is and how officers get promoted within the military, you're sort of taught to be essentially, to get to the next level, you need to be yes man. And I think it's created sort of one of the reasons why we have such a toxic leadership problem within the military. And obviously it exists within the civilian world. And I think it exists specifically, not just in the military, but exists within our government. So I think this is definitely an issue that I can relate to. Let's listen a little bit more.
Look, there's a lot of good patriots that are still there who think that they're doing the right thing. And this is a dilemma that I had. I was like, well, do I stay here and do I soldier on and be a good soldier? And you know, do I show up every day and, you know, do my darndest? And then if the big strategic picture gets messed up, well, that's not really on me. You know, I did that for 20 plus years in the military, in the agency, and kind of see where that got us, right?
I also agree with this, because one of the things that you don't have the ability to do in the military is, you know, you can't just leave whenever you want to. You have a contract, you have to see it through. You know, he's in a volunteer position, and as he'll talk about later, you know, he was in a position where he could actually leave and actually help to make a difference. And unfortunately in the military, we get caught in these situations where we're kind of stuck. We have to soldier on, because we can't just quit whenever we want to. And that becomes sort of a very frustrating situation. You know, you experience that, and I can definitely relate to what he's talking about. Let's continue listening.
I am sympathetic to people who are inside, who are still like, hey, you know, I'm just a guy. I'm not that important. I'm trying to do my job. I'll do what I'm told. However, the people who came in, you know, with President Trump in key leadership positions that are a part of this movement and leading this movement, I think they've got to reflect on what we ran on, because this is not what we ran on, and they have to live with it. And so they can either make a decision to try and influence the situation from inside, but once they realize they can't influence that situation inside, then they have a choice to make. Do they stay and be complicit with it, or do they leave and try and get us back on the right path?
So Joe goes further into about the people that are still there, what they should do. And it's sort of this call to action, which is the people that are still there, you should definitely try to see if you can get through, to help him have that other option, you sort of get that opposite view. That way he's making sure Trump is getting both sides of the equation. You know, he's getting both views. Once they realize that, they then have the same choice that he had, which was, do I stay here and do I remain complicit? And then that's up for anybody, for each person, for them to make their own choice. And I also, whether or not I agree with Joe's current view on whether or not we should be doing this air campaign, I do agree with this part where if you're in a situation and you don't agree with what's going on and you're in a volunteer position like he is, yeah, do you stay there and be complicit or you get up and leave? And I actually think based off of what I've seen of Joe's experience in the situation, I can definitely respect his decision to get up to leave. And obviously we'll get into this later, but he feels like him leaving and resigning was his best way of helping to try to get through to Trump, to help Trump in his particular situation and not screw Trump over and not be against him. So I find that really interesting. And, you know, the more you listen to it, it is you kind of see where Joe was trying to go with this, regardless of what the media on both sides was trying to paint of him at the time. So this next section, Joe talks about path forward.
You're frustrated with President Trump. I know probably a lot of your viewers are frustrated with President Trump. I think if President Trump sits and thinks about where we are and how we got here, I think he'll understand that we're in a bad spot and we need to get out of it. And in order to get out of it, he needs to take drastic action. Now, that's where the good news is, and this is what gives me some hope. President Trump is good at taking drastic action. He is decisive. He is unpredictable. But in terms of doing big things, that's the story of President Trump's life.
So I like one that Joe kind of already acknowledges, like to one Shawn, because, you know, his frustration with the administration, and obviously a lot of Shawn Ryan's viewers are going to be frustrated as well. But once again, he comes back to, you can tell he's very hopeful for Trump because, you know, he talks about, he's like, if there's one person who can get us out of this, it's Trump, because he's a very bold person. He's a man who takes drastic action. And that's a big part of his administration. And we've seen that time and time again. Trump will do things. And one of the reasons that Iran stopped attacking us through their proxies is because, you know, people are afraid that because he is unpredictable and he will take bold action. And so, one, I think it's good that, you know, Joe, he still has hope that Trump can turn this around, and basically agrees that Trump has these qualities in order to get us the situation, which I think is a good thing. I definitely think this is definitely a unifying message, because whether or not you like Trump or you don't, I think at the end of the day, we want what's best for our country. And if there's one person, because, you know, presidents all the time will get us in situations it's hard for you to get out of it, but it's a good thing that we're in a situation where the man who's currently the president has the qualities, has the ability to get us out of this, because he is such a bold person. And it doesn't matter how hard we've dug ourselves into it, but by each day that we get farther into this, especially if people are really considering getting boots on the ground in Iran, you know, the farther we get to that, the worse we get. I'm definitely cautious of this, and I'm glad that he's at least still hopeful that Trump can pull us out of it. In this next section, Joe covers the rumors about his wife, any influence that she may have had on his resignation.
A lot of people are saying that your resignation and change of heart is because of influence from your wife. Is there any validity to that?
No, not at all. I mean, we share very similar views. It's one of the reasons we probably got married.
So I remember when I first heard this particular rumor and I looked into it, and the rumors were saying that because this publication that she worked for, Greystone, had done sort of lean towards the left, they had made articles about anti-Israel type of things. But when you actually look farther into it, his current wife, who's a part of this, has never actually been an author of any of those type of material that was like anti-Israel, sort of like that left side of things. Just because she's a part of a publication doesn't mean that, you know, she believes everything that publication puts out. And then also, for somebody who lives in DC, if you want to date people, you kind of have to learn how to date liberals. And I've had numerous long-term relationships, and was dating somebody for almost 3 years who was a liberal. And you know what? It's okay. Be in a long-term relationship with someone who may have slightly different political views with you, and that's okay. Was it ever going to influence on how I did my job? Absolutely not. So, one, I didn't really believe these rumors anyways, but when I looked farther into it, there was really no validity. There was no evidence of it. And until I hear any evidence, which I highly doubt at this point, this is just a rumor that's not going to go anywhere. So in the next few clips, Joe discusses his main goals for the next coming weeks, which is to reach the president.
Now, what's next for you?
The next week or two, I really want to push as hard as I can to attempt to reach the president. And I know that puts me in the line of fire and in the news cycle and people sniping at me online. But that's the only plan I truly had leaving this. The way I look at it is I already kind of got to do my childhood dream, like in our old line of work. I got to do that, and everything else is kind of gravy. I want to be able to serve my country. I care deeply about the future future of this country. I care deeply about the future that we leave for our kids.
So I remember when his resignation first happened, there were so many rumors, so many allegations that were going around, but like, what was he trying to do? Was he trying to get a book deal? Was he trying to run for office again? And, obviously I was like, hey, we should wait for the propaganda, wait for the political posturing to go away. But also because I knew he was a person who was known as such a high character. And I've never heard anything to say that he had changed in any way. And I'm glad that we did wait, because I think that his words are really we can really start to meet his actions, because him saying that his main goal is that he wants to reach Trump and he wants to provide this sort of, make sure that he's getting this alternate view, especially if he is in this echo chamber involving with the Warhawks. It makes more sense, especially with everything that he's sort of done up to this point and has said in this message. He's been very cool. He's been very calm and collected, and even going here to even calm Shawn Ryan down in the middle of his fervor. I think it even says something right there. So I definitely believe that he believes in this. And so, that definitely gives me hope, definitely from his side of things. And it definitely is defeating left was hoping for and what the right was afraid of, that he's basically switching sides over to the left. I definitely don't think that's happening. I just think he has a different opinion, and this is the way that he feels is he can get his message across and help his country. If you're looking for that boost in the gym, both physically and cognitively, and you hate the taste of powdered creatines, it's by far the best tasting creatine gummies I've tried. And I know for a fact that they work because I've tried them, and they're one of the companies that third-party tests their product more than any other creatine gummy company out there. So visit Tasty Gains, and you can use my discount code Viking when you visit, and you'll find the link below in my description. Try them today. So in this last clip, Joe addresses the rumors that he could run for office again.
After running for Congress out of my system, I'm living in Virginia right now, and I don't think there's much of a prayer where I live for for a Republican of my politics to get elected. So no, definitely not in the midterms. I don't really have a desire to run for office again. It was a good experience. I'm glad I did it. I'm also glad it didn't work out, because I've kind of had to interact enough now with Congress in my last job that, man, that does not look enjoyable at all.
So this actually makes a lot of sense to me because of my dealings. One, if you know what's going on in Virginia and the latest governor, being a Republican is definitely not going to work out for you very well. And also the fact that he did run twice and didn't happen, and then he's interacts with Congress and the Senate on a regular basis. And so he now knows what that job would be like, and now knows from a job that's similar where he gets to interact that that's not something he would want to do. That the job that he would want to do is advising the presidents from these type roles. And I know in another clip or in another portion of the video, he talks about for the next administration, he would love to help advise. And, that's where I think he's sort of found his niche with his experience that he's learned through his life in special operations and intelligence operation. I definitely don't think that he will be running again. I would be extremely surprised. And once again, going back to where his words seem to be matching his actions, but we'll see. Remember, this isn't about Joe Kent. This is about analyzing things and thinking critically. This is about nuance, not jumping to conclusions. This is about waiting for the noise to die down and waiting for all the information to come out. Let the posturing and the propaganda fall to the wayside, because right now, too many people are just picking sides, and just trying to understand something, especially from the other side, doesn't mean you're agreeing with it. Because if we stop trying to understand each other, especially the people that have different viewpoints than us, that's when we stop thinking altogether. And that's when our real problems start. And that will truly lead to the downfall of our society and this great nation. If you enjoyed this content, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Doing so really helps my channel. And if you want to support even further, consider becoming a member. And if you want to donate, you're more than welcome to. The link is in my bio, and I appreciate any support that you guys give, because it helps me to continue to do these type of long form videos with a level of analysis and critical thinking that I enjoy, and I know a lot of you guys have been really appreciative as of late.